Hey guys, Travis with Fat Daddies here. Today, we're going to be checking out the front wheel bearings on this Challenger. I've had this car a while, but there's been some things about it that I just needed to correct, and so I haven't really driven it a ton. First thing we did was rebuild the motor in it because the cam was wiped out in it. So I think I've put maybe 600 miles on it since. Just don't drive it that much. So I've got another video up of me completely going through the rear suspension. Haven't done anything with the front suspension yet. So after I put these new wheels on, I noticed there was a little bit of something kind of running out here a little bit. And it may have been just the cutting oil from when I put these, that I put on the screws when I put these center caps on. But I pulled the wheel off and I thought, well, maybe it's also leaking around the dust cap a little bit and slinging a little bit of grease out or something. So I wanted to take care of that. So when I pulled the wheel off, I didn't really notice anything around the dust cap, and I popped it off, and from what I can tell, just from seeing the end of the bearing there, I don't really see any grease at all. So that's concerning. So what we're going to do today is jack this thing up, pull this wheel off. I've got the Sleep Comanche up on the lift right now, so I'm going to have to do this on jack stands. So we'll get this pulled off and get that pulled apart and see what we're going to need to do with these bearings. Okay, so we got the wheel off. I want to go ahead and mention that even if you don't have a Challenger or Cuda, E-Body or whatever, Ford and Chevy even, this procedure that we're going to do here pretty much fits all of them. You know, there may be a little bit of difference here or there, but if you can watch this tutorial and do it yourself, you can do it on the others. It's you know, relatively universal. So let's get into it here. So I've got the tire off and the dust cap off here. So if we get in here close and look, you see there's a little bit of grease on the end of the spindle and the retainer here and stuff. But if you look back in, these are the bearings, and I don't see any grease at all. So we're going to pull this apart and check this thing out a lot closer. Alright, we are going to start with getting this caliper off. We got just two 9/16 head bolts holding it on. There's one. We'll clean that up a little bit before we put it back in. There's two. Brake pad. Sit it down. And we'll just kind of lay the caliper over here. There we go. Alright, so the first thing we'll do is get this cotter pin out. And that goes between the teeth on this little nut retainer. So see that retainer fits right on top of the nut and keeps the nut from being able to back off at all. Sometimes some cars will have a castle nut Some cars will have a castle nut on there so the pin will go directly through the nut. Why is that thing fighting me so hard? It really wants to do its job. All right. So here is the retainer, and you see how it's shaped, and it slides right over that nut. And then you got a hole here in the spindle, and your cotter pin goes right between those teeth. Now see, this nut shouldn't be super tight, so in order to keep it from backing off, this thing sits over it, pin goes through the teeth and holds it from turning off. Keeps it tight basically without being tight. Now we'll take the nut off. We are not going to use a crescent wrench to put the nut back on, but I wasn't sure what size it was, so I just grabbed it. These are not super tight. See, look, I barely moved it, so we'll take that off. Now right behind the nut here we have this washer. Pull it out. This washer has a little key in it. Wipe it off here. Which slides right up in the slot on the spindle to keep it from turning. And with that, we have exposed our bearing. So let's take a look at it here. There's some grease on it, but very little. Yeah, you want this to be fully packed with grease. And there's like hardly any in there. We're gonna replace them just to be safe. I want this car to be reliable. Let's pull this rotor off and we'll take a look inside of it. Now that we got our rotor out and our hub, our next step is we're going to pull this wheel seal out. You can use a screwdriver or a pry bar, or I think this is just made for wheel seals. I don't know. We're going to go in here and we're going to hook under it. Pop it out. So there's our wheel seal. Now, let me grab some paper towels here. This is a messy job and it sucks trying to like operate the camera with super greasy fingers. So here is our inner bearing. And it looks much nicer grease-wise. It's nice and full of grease. But since I have the bearings, and we saw how they did the front, we are going to go ahead and continue to replace these with new bearings. And then that also will just give us peace of mind knowing that we have went through and serviced them. So we're not really sure what the previous owner did. Now let's look at the new bearing. So here's the new bearing. It comes in two pieces. You've got your bearing, and then you've got what they call the race. And the bearing actually rides in the race. The rollers right here roll right here on this nice smooth surface. Like I said, this part sits on the spindle. It doesn't turn on the spindle. It sits still. The inside of the bearings roll on that. Outside of the bearings roll in the race. Now, the race is actually pressed or driven down in here inside the hub. And so we're going to have to drive the outer race that way, and the inner race this way, and we're going to put the new ones in. And I'm going to show you how we go about that. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to wipe out all the old grease the best I can and brake clean it out, get it good and clean. Just, you know, you don't know if there's old dirt, contaminants, shavings, or anything else from old bearings or whatever in there. So we're just going to clean all that out. And then we're going to start with new fresh grease, new fresh bearings, and we'll be good to go. So let me get that cleaned out and we'll get the races out. Okay, so I've only got two hands. I'm not sure how well this is going to show up. I'm going to try to show you anyway. So right there's the race, the outer wheel bearing race. And we're going to need to drive that out from the back side. Now if you can see down in here, you ain't got much to get a bite on to drive it out. It's that teeniest little ring. That teeny little overlap right there is what you got to drive on to get this thing out. And then if we flip it around this way, because there's your inner race right here, flip it around this way and look in there, you get a little bit more of an edge, but again, not a lot. Now, you got to be really careful too when you're driving these things out, because as they come out, you don't want to scar up the inside of the hub where they drive into. There's not a lot of tolerance here because they've got to go in tight. So if you gouge up and scar up the inside where these slide into, they're not going to want to go back in good. And then you're going to have bearing failure. So a lot of times they say use a brass punch. The problem with using a brass punch I've found on trying to catch these tiny little edges is I've done it, but you'll just shear the edge, you'll just shear the corners right off of your punches. Even with a steel one, you got to be careful. You need something with a good edge on it so it doesn't slip off. And like I said, you just want to just drive on the race because you don't want to gouge up the surface where they seat. Another thing I've done before is use a good chisel that hasn't been beat up and rounded off your edges, because you can come in here sometimes, I can't really show you, but you can get 2 points of contact there in the corners and get it to start moving that way. Or you bring in your punch and you just catch that edge and you work your way around and drive it out. Well, I'm already having a hell of a time keeping the punch from slipping off of it. I'm going to try the chisel here where I can get 2 points of contact, kind of at an angle like this. See if I can get it started. Yep, there it went. Like I said, the chisel's got 2 points of contact and you cannot angle into it. Whereas with the punch, you got to come straight down. And it's wanting to slip off because there's so little lip. But I felt it move on that first hit. There it went again. But like I said, be very careful. You don't want to gouge the inside of the where the race seats. Oh, I've already driven it down flush. So let's tilt it up here. I should just take a little tap. out it comes. Now, for the inner race. Feel it moving? Let's check how it's going. Yep. It's moved down 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. Another cup of wax, it should come right out. Is that it? Voila. Sorry. There we go. Both races out. Now I'm going to clean up in here a little bit more. Got a little more room with the races out. And we'll install the new races. So for our next step of installing the races, we're going to break out a little bit more specialized tool than a chisel. I have used a socket, a piece of pipe, a chisel, a punch, preferably brass, or whatever, to install these things years ago when I was younger. But again, you have to be very careful. You don't scar up the inside of the hub, and you do not scar up this race. So preferably you want to use like a brass something that's softer, or aluminum that's softer than this steel, so it doesn't mar it up. But the easiest and best way to do it is with one of these sets. So you got a handle here that you can drive on with a hammer, and you got these different size drivers to use to install the races. Now, unfortunately, none of these drivers fit perfectly on these two races. I've already checked them out. This one, for the small one here, is too small. Let me show you. Get over here in front of the camera. So see how that edge would want to slip down in there and bind up. Now this one is just a shade too big. If you notice, it doesn't seat down that lip against the top of the race, and so you will be binding it inside here. So what we will be able to do, because the outside of this is just slightly smaller than the outside of this, we'll flip it upside down, and we'll be able to drive in the race like that. The whole point of it is you want to be able to drive it in square, not crooked, because that'll just make it hard for it to go in, and then it'll seat nice and flat in there. So driving like this is fine. But if this was even slightly bigger than this is going to be wedged into your hub and be a bear to get out. So it's slightly smaller, so we're good there. On the bigger race, the inner race, we've got this one, which still doesn't fit perfectly, but we'll be able to put it in there like that, and this lip sits up here and should drive it in nice and square. So let me get that set up and we will drive them in. Okay, so this is the handle, and we're putting this one all upside down because I told you it didn't quite fit right. Now I'll try to remember to turn down the volume for my hammer smacks again. And you should be able to, I'm not going to turn it completely mute, but you should be able to hear a change in sound. Usually it deadens a little bit when it fully seats. Now, it's a little more obvious, I think, if I was hitting it on a block of wood or something, but on this table, know if you'll be able to hear it quite as well or not. We'll see. So you gotta watch, you gotta drive it in square. Move around here so maybe you can see a little better. There it went. Did you hear it? Completely different sound. Seated. Next. Okay, got our other driver and our other race. Tap to get it started. I said it's got to be square, so want to be ornery and not start square. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to use a different driver and flip it upside down and see if I can't kind of, this side's a little high, see if I can't work it over there, square it up. No, I can't. I've done got it in there sideways. Tap it back out and we'll try again. I let it go a little too far crooked before I switched the driver, and that caused the issue. Another thing we might be able to do is take an even bigger driver and drive it down till the top, because it's just a small gap till the top is flush with this, which will have seated it straight, and then we'll switch back to the other once it's started. Alright, so like I said, once again we're going to knock it down flush with that and then finish seating it in. There we go, perfect. So it's started straight, and if we can keep it straight, we'll knock it right down in. I want to continue with that one. Let's do that. Alright, now I'm going to switch back to my original one, because this is bigger than the outside of that race. It's going to hit that, it's going to hit on that lip. So we're going to switch back to this one, and that will continue to take it right on down to seat. Once again, listen for the sound change. There it went. Race is installed. Okay, now for the dirty part. They make tools for this where you can put the bearing in and use a grease gun, you pump it full, but I just do this by hand. So it's super messy. Hate doing it, but what you're going to do is you're going to take a little bit of grease and you're going to put it in the palm of one hand. Like that. Then you're going to take your bearing. Let me come over here by the camera a little bit better to explain this. So you're going to take this lip right here, this outer lip, and you're going to scrape it against the grease like that. And what you're doing is you're packing it up in there. And you just keep going And if you look right there, you can see where the grease is starting to actually come all the way up through in between the bearings. So you basically just keep going like that. There you go. Look at it. See how it's squirted out through? Now we have to go do that all the way around the bearing. And we're going to do both bearings. So let me get to it. You can see there where it's coming through again. So I'll just keep moving around. Okay, so I've gotten all the way around the bearing. Got it all nice and packed full of grease. So we'll sit this one down. I got a nice clean towel in here. You want to have nice clean hands or gloves and nice clean grease. If you drop this on the dirty floor, I mean, get a new one or clean it out super duper good with like brake clean and get it all cleaned out and start over, because you don't want dirt and grit in this grease, because it'll just act like sandpaper on your bearings and you'll have bearing failure. So, that said, keep them clean. Bearing number 2. Okay, now we have this one packed all nice and full of grease. Something else I like to do, and honestly I feel like, depends on where you look. I think I saw on the Timken site earlier that really you just have to pack your bearings like we did. And I think I saw a PDF or whatever, they said coat the inside of your hub in between the bearings with some. That's what I always like to do anyway. Some people will argue that all you have to do is pack the bearings, and then whatever's in the middle in between them doesn't really matter. I feel like it's hard to have too much grease. I mean, you can have too much grease, but for a boat trailer or something, you would pack as much as you could, because if there's grease in there, it means water can't get in. Or like I used to, lots of times I do 4x4s that are actually going to be going off-road and mud holes and water crossings and stuff like that. I pack the hell out of those too, because like I said, with grease in there, where there's grease there can't be water. Where there's airspace, there can be water. I'm not planning on driving this thing through water crossings or mud holes, so we're just going to put a layer in there. What a mess. Let me take one of these gloves off and I'll get the camera and show you what I got down in here. That's what I did. Just pack some grease down in there. Go around the spindle and stuff. Do you need it? I don't know. I like it like that though. So now let's talk a little bit about wheel seals. And that is what goes in right here. You saw me pop it out. It seals against the back of the spindle there to keep your grease from coming out and from dirt from going in. Now, this is not the correct wheel seal, but I want to show you as an example. This is what a lot of them look like. It's a very common style. Your end here, it's got a little spring. Let me get here a little closer where you can see. Right in here, there's a little spring that wraps around the rubber. It helps seal that around there. Now your spring goes to the inside of where you're sealing. And if you were using this tight, you know, you saw where we were trying to get the race to drive straight. These are even more kind of critical to get driven in straight, because once they start going sideways, they get wedged in there, then you can't, it's very hard to get it. If you get in there too far sideways, like I did that race and I had to tap it back out, chances are you're going to screw it up getting it back out. So, got to get them in there straight on the first go. So, you know, with one like this, you would put it in, and we'd take one of these drivers, sit down on top of it. We drive it in straight and flat until it seats right against the top of that. We're going to make it flush. Now, this particular application that we're doing on this Challenger is different from most any I've seen. It has this like rubber dust seal boot or whatever that sticks up above this, so we can't we can't drive on that rubber to drive this in. Has to be difficult. But what I did find was a piece of 2.5-inch exhaust pipe, inside diameter exhaust pipe, fits just right over that seal to drive it in. Tolerances may vary on the different pipes a little bit. I don't know. 2.5-inch exhaust pipe. But that's what we're going to use. I'm going to take a little bit of this grease, put it right around this inside edge. I wiped a lot of it out where this thing goes. And we're going to take our exhaust pipe. We're going to try to set it on there straight. Obviously, I can't hit on the middle of the pipe, so I'm going to put a piece 2x4 on it, but this 2x4 I had laying over here is all grungy, and I don't want to be knocking dirt down in the pipe into my new bearing. So I just put some tape on it, which will just keep loose stuff from falling down in there. So we'll put this on. We're going to gently try to tap it and get it started. Well, it's already trying to go crooked on me. I'm afraid. Okay, yeah, very careful. Try this again. These things can be a pain in the butt, but this type is even more of a pain in the butt. Because if it was the flush kind, you know, if you just see it starting to just start a little crooked, you can move your driver over a little bit one way or the other and kind of apply a little more pressure on one side or the other to get it straight. This one, not so much. So let's try this again. Alright, it's going down that side again. I'm going to risk it here and hit this side. Oh, there we go. Oh, it's popping up over here. Am I going to screw this one up to show you guys? I feel like I might. Oh, there, I got lucky. Come on. Yeah, it's already bent up a little bit right here, but I don't know. I'm gonna try it. If I can get it started, because I just kind of bent like up a little bit, like warped it a little bit. So if I can get it in there straight and tap it down, it should, when it seats against the bottom, right there, it should level out. If not, we'll just rip it out. Try again with another seal. Let's see. All right, it's already up. Oh, come on. No, I'm tearing it up over here on this side. Daggone it. Yeah, see where it's bending it up? Well, that sucks. Because I only have 2 of those, and I need 2 of them. So, I guess I will be using my other one. Hopefully, I get this one in. And I'll have to get another one tomorrow. Today is Sunday. I'll have to get another one tomorrow for the other side. Okay, we'll try something a little bit different this time. So it's 2.5 inch pipe on this side. Let me show you here closer. Whoops, sorry. So see how it's pushing kind of on the inside of the seal? So I'm going to flip it around. It doesn't center on there as good. The bell end, and I'm going to push more on this outside. I just trued this up. It had a big burr on it. So I'm going to push down there on this outside edge to push it down. See if we have any better luck. These things are always a pain in the butt, but this one's an extra pain in the butt. Immediately goes down crooked. Y'all bored yet? Come on. It's not even on the start. It just falls in immediately crooked. One side. Is it starting? I think it's just walking around. Really? Frustrating. Just think, only one more to do after this. On the other side. You know, I've had trouble with these before, but never this much. There we go. I think it's going. I just gave it a... Tired of screwing around with this smack. There we go. Oh, let's that still up a little. All right, so I took a gamble, gave it a frustrated whack, and it just happened to seat and start in. And whether or not it's because I used the bell end or not, I don't know. But, hey, finally. Now, let's move on. All right. So now I'm going to put the thinnest little film of grease right here around the back where that rubber seal rides. And then right here on the spindle, just to help slide everything on a little bit. So off camera, my ADD kicked in, and I decided, well, there's only 3 bolts here holding this dust shield on, and the dust shield was pretty grody. So I pulled that off, and I started sandblasting it. The backside I did real good, and then I remembered how much I hated sandblasting. So I was going to do just kind of knock the loose off this side where you can't really see. But then my OCD kicked in and said, no, do it right. So I battled against it, and I did about 90% of the job here on the inside. And sprayed it black, cleaned up the face of the spindle, and well, this was off, and painted it to just help stop further corrosion or whatever. And it's always a good idea to do that. It takes a little extra time, but you know, when you got something apart on your car, you know, take the time to clean all the stuff back up when you put it together. It just helps it look better and last longer. So now we're going to put this on. Sometimes, there we go, there it went. Sometimes that bearing, the tolerance is so tight that you gotta finagle a little bit and then it'll slip right on. Gotta hold your mouth right, I guess. So we got that one on. Now we're gonna take our outer bearing that we've got all greased up. I'm gonna slide it right there into the race. Then we'll take our washer we cleaned up. Remember, it's got the little keyway right here, or key right here to go in the keyway. We'll slide that in. Next comes our nut. So we're going to turn this on. Now, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need, remember when I took this off, it wasn't very tight at all. Just over finger tight, really. So what we're going to do is we're going to, as we turn that, we're going to turn the rotor, and as we turn the rotor, we're going to tighten this, and we're going to over tighten it at first. And what that's going to do is draw everything in extra tight, and we're going to seat those bearings in those tapered races, so they'll seat in there, you know, because there's grease and everything in there, and we're going to get them in there good and tight. And then you can't run it that way because you'll burn them up too tight. But we're going to turn the rotor. I'm sitting on the wrong side to do this. I mean, you don't want to like put a breaker bar or anything on this thing, but give it a good snug, all while turning. Okay, so then, once we're pretty confident we got everything seated there good, we're going to back this off. See, just finger tight now. But see, you don't want this to fall forward. So you've gotten it all tightened up, and then you just back that off, and then you bring it in. I like to bring it in just finger tight, not even really cranking on it. It's kind of, just good and finger tight. And what that's going to do is it doesn't, you seat the bearings, and then you don't want a ton of pressure on them. You just want them to ride in the correct area. So you relieve the pressure, and then you come in, finger tight your nut, and then you take your keeper and set it on there. And see, it has a lot of notches, so you can use that to clock it just right, just like that, to where we can take our cotter pin, go right down through, and then we will bend these up to keep it from coming out. And there's our bearings replaced. Now I'm just going to take this dust cap, and I just put the tiniest, I don't always do this. If they're brand new or whatever and they fit good, I don't do this. But in this case, I'm going to put the tiniest film of gasket sealer around there. Left my hammer somewhere. And then tap that dust seal on, or dust cap. It's kind of bent up anyway, but yeah, that'll help keep it from leaking. And all you got to do is put your caliper back on. Well, don't forget to clean up all the grease off your rotor, front and back. Put your caliper back on, your brake shoes, pads. Put your wheel back on, and rinse and repeat on the other side if need be. And that's how you do it. Well, that about does it for swapping out front wheel bearings. Like I said, this should help you get through Chevrolet, Ford, Mopar, most any of them. Once they're close enough to the same on that most of those you should be able to take care of just following along. So hopefully this has helped somebody out or entertained somebody. Thanks for sticking along and watching as long as you did. If you're still here, if you could, the usual like, subscribe. Let's hear some comments. I'd really appreciate it. And check back in. Let's get some more content out there.